Alhamdulillahi wahda, wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da amma ba'd. We've been looking at the hadith now, as we discussed in the beginning, the Quran and Sunnah or hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we have ijma' and qiyas, the four main sources, two primary, which is Quran and Sunnah, and two secondary, which is ijma' and qiyas. Ijma' is consensus, qiyas is analogy, hard work to identify the ruling based on Quran and Sunnah. So individual strive to identify the rules, qiyas, applying the analogy. But anyway, we'll cover that subsequently. So then we moved on after having a very brief discussion on Quran, which we would do in the usul tafsir sessions. We moved on to some detail of hadith, and you recall that we mentioned that is, broadly speaking, two categories, two types of hadith. Hadith is either ahad or mutawatir. Ahadith is the plural of hadith. So ahad, wahid, one solitary narration, or mutawatir. Mutawatir is the hadith which is narrated and transmitted by so many people that it is inconceivable, impossible for all of them from different times and different places to gather together, concoct a lie, fabricate a lie, or all of them forget the issue, all of them misunderstand the issue, and somehow there is a fault or defect or a wrongness there. It is completely inconceivable because so many people said the same thing. So, for example, as I mentioned before, it is impossible to say that the incident of tsunami didn't happen, or the 9/11 never happened, or July the 7th never happened. Impossible. Why? Because there's so many people said it. Yeah, how it happened, what exactly happened, that may be different upon. When we talk about some incident, whether that incident happened or not, there's no shadow of doubt, even if the people who transmitted it are not trustworthy, or we don't even know them. But there's so many of them, so many different television programs and broadcasting and radios and papers mentioned it, that it is not possible that everyone started to have a conspiracy against everyone else. It doesn't work like that in human nature. So likewise, so that's a mutawatir hadith. Then there's ahad hadith, and there are three broad categories of ahad. They're either mashhur, aziz, or gharib. Let's look at them. Ahad narration that does not fulfill the criteria of mutawatir. Now, some people think ahad may mean only one narration. It doesn't have to be one rawi, one narrator. It could be more than one, but doesn't come up to the level of mutawatir. So then you may ask, what is mutawatir? Then there's no specific number for mutawatir. Minimum 10 according to some, but mutawatir means whatever is required in that situation for a mujtahid imam to be satisfied with the numbers. For example, for the hadith of wiping over leather socks, khuffain, over leather socks, because Quran says that you have to wash your feet, and there's ijma on that, and there's hadith mutawatir on that. To change this import of Quran, you have to have hadith mutawatir, which is strong, very strong, that can bring about the change in the meaning of Quran, which is washing. So you're now wiping. How can you do that? It has to be the number of narration, another Quranic ayah, or ijma, the consensus. So when Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi got about 70 Sahaba's narration, that's when he said, it was quite late in his lifetime, that he said, now I accept that this 70 narration is good enough number to change the import of Quranic injunction. So for some mujtahid it would be 70, for some it could be less. For Imam Shafi, maybe 5 is enough. For Imam Ahmad, it could be 8 or 10. It depends. Not for a specific number, it's the situation. For example, if there was a matter of finding out what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do with regards to him having siesta in the afternoon. So how would he sleep? How would he spend his time of siesta indoors? How many narrations do you need for that? He had 9 wives at one time in Medina. So at the most, you could, if you have 3 saying the same thing, that's good enough. 1 is not maybe good enough. 2 or 3, maybe 4 at the most is good enough, because you only have 9 wives, and out of those 9 wives are three are telling us, or 4 are telling us exactly the same thing, and that's enough. And others passed away before we could verify from them. That's good enough number. So in that matter, it will be fine. On the other hand, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us something in Hajjatul Wada, in Jummah khutbah, and there are like thousands of Sahaba present. And how many narrations? 5 narrations. That's not enough. 50, not enough. 100, yes, good. You see what I mean? So it depends on what situation, where we are dealing with, what is the context. Okay. Anyway, so anything which is not mutawatir, massively, recurrently, rigorously authenticated hadith, is ahad narrations. Now, ahad narration that does not fulfill the criteria of mutawatir. This is the main bulk of ahadith. Mutawatir ahadith, maybe few hundreds, not a lot, 200, 300, if you stretch too much, 500. But all the rest, now how many ahadith altogether? Remember this as well. With every different chain, if you wanted to count each hadith as muhaddithun do, because muhaddithun, the hadith masters, they would take a hadith with his statement, which is matan, the text, and also as its chain of narration. So if the chain gets changed, then the hadith is different. For example, innamal a'malu binniyat, coming from 5 different teachers to Imam Bukhari, or 7 different teachers to Imam Bukhari, he would consider them 5 hadith. And this is how he would put them in Sahih al-Bukhari. Certain ahadith he would bring about 20 times, each time with different teacher. So the chain is different. Many a time different sahabi, different in-betweeners, some similar, some different. But there is a different chain somehow, either with one different individual or more than one. So the hadith statement remains the same, yet, which is the text, yet the chain is different. So you would count them as separate narrations. So if you count all of the hadith with all the different chains, it would come to maybe 1 million different narrations, sahih and weak and fabricated all together. And if you wanted to count them as sahih, all the different chain of narration, according to Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah, that he knew of was about 100,000. So he said, I have got 300,000 narrations in my mind, with chain memorized, text memorized, long, short, everything. And 300 plus extra 300,000 written, they're separate. So from the 300,000 that he knew of by heart, he said 100,000, according to my standard, are sahih. I would classify them as sahih. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who was the teacher of Imam Bukhari, knew about 1 million narrations. Hafiz ibn Manda, likewise, many others, they would know about million hadith, but very few who knew million hadith. But that includes Sahih, Dhaif, and everything. So Imam Bukhari, from the 300, 200 are not Sahih according to his standard, but 100,000 were. So majority of those hadith are, so now I'm talking, so if you take the wording as one hadith, regardless of how many chains there are, why there were so many chains? Because every imam, every muhaddis would like, every student would like to get as many teachers as possible for the same hadith to get the strength of the hadith. If they're all saying the same thing, the hadith becomes ever so more strong or stronger. So Imam Muslim, for example, Imam, they would have like, thousands of shuyukh. Imam Bukhari studied with 1,081 or 80, 1,080 teachers that he got hadith from. So they would try to get up to 10, ideally 20. If not 20, they would get 10 narrations from different, 10 chains for the same narration to get the strength there. Especially in the later time when there was a lot of talk and discussion about fabrication. People started fabricating narration. They just concocted it. So they would just go for different narration, as many as possible. So try minimum 10 for each narration. So that become 10 hadiths with the one hadith text. So Imam Manadir Hasan Gilani, rahmatullah alayhi, he is someone who passed away only like about 50 years or so ago. He compiled a book. He's written a book, Tadween al-Hadith, where he said, according to him, it's about 10,000 statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, give and take. So 10,000, he said, 10,000 statements. So out of that, 500, 200 to 300, 400 maximum are mutawatir. The rest are ahad narration, solitary narration, means not coming to the level of mutawatir, 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe. Obviously, as such, it does not give you the certainty. Remember, what gives you the 100% certainty are three things. Number one, hadith mutawatir. Number two, Quran. Number one. Number two, hadith mutawatir. Number three, ijma' ummah, consensus. So obviously, ahad narrations are speculative. There is there's a possibility of human error. There is a possibility of human error. And there are three types of it: mashhur, aziz, and gharib. So mashhur, what is mashhur? Mashhur is also called mustafid. And in this narration, you have minimum 3 narrators at each level. The example is this. نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فعن ابن عمر وفعن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه. Remember this, Umar is without wow. When you find this wow, I'm talking about this wow here, yeah? When you find a wow like this, at the end of Umar, it's pronounced Amr, okay? It is Amr, okay? Amr, not Umar. So, Amr, this is Amr. So, An ibn Amr ibn al-As, his son, Abdullah ibn Amr. So Ibn Amr generally would mean Abdullah ibn Amr. Ibn Umar means Abdullah ibn Umar. Ibn Zubayr means Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Ibn Abbas means Abdullah ibn Abbas. Okay, so they are called Abadilai Arba. There's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud as well, but he's more senior than these relatively younger Sahaba. Their parents, their fathers were Sahaba, their mothers were Sahabi. We had as well. So they were the children Sahabi, and they were young at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's departure from the world, late teens, and that is why their fathers were the Sahaba and they were Sahaba as well. So they were all given the name Abdullah. Why? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that this is the most beautiful name and most beloved name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Abdullah and Abdul Rahman. So they had their first male born as Abdullah, second Abdul Rahman. So they happened a lot with the Sahaba. Such was their ittiba', following the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anyway, An ibn Amr radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, that's why we say radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, may Allah be pleased with them both. Father, Amr ibn al-As, and Abdullah, the son, both. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم said, إن الله تعالى لا subhanallah, the hadith I just mentioned, إن الله تعالى لا يقبض العلم انتزاعا ينتزعه من العباد ولكن يقبض العلم بقبض العلماء حتى إذا لم يبقي عالما اتخذ الناس رؤوسا جهالا فسئلوا فأفتوا بغير علم فضلوا وأضلوا. Okay, the hadith I just mentioned, how ilm would just be lifted by the death of a scholar. متفق عليه. Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Another hadith, Man atal jumu'ata falyaghtasil. Whoever comes to Jumu'ah, let him take ghusl. Now there's a difference of opinion between, or different way of looking at fuqaha and muhaddithun. Muhaddithun consider this a type of ahad narration, whereas fuqaha, the faqih, they consider it a type which is separate. So they say ahad, mutawatir, and mashhur in between it. And this is why in Hanafi school, mashhur hadith is also taken as given the definitive proof. It's like mutawatir. They take it more higher than the people. And there's subtle difference as well. The definition, which is ahad in the beginning and later on becomes mutawatir, but we leave that for the time being. But anyway, so that's another one. It can be sound, fair, hasan, weak, depending on the state of the narrator, as we know. So we have to, all the ahadith mashhura also needs to be verified. The books written on this is Hafiz Shamsuddin As-Sakhawi. He wrote it. He's a student of Hafiz ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani. المقاصد الحسنة في بيان كثير من الأحاديث المشتهرة على الألسنة. This is Al-Sina, bit of mistake there. And then Imam Ajluni, more recent one. He's a كشف الخفاء ومزيل الباس عما اشتهر من الأحاديث، يعني عما اشتهر من الأحاديث على ألسنة الناس. The famous ahadith which are more mashhur or more famous on the tongue of people. So he's trying to remove the veil from that, the hiddenness of that. Then there's Al-Aziz, the hadith, called hadith, one of the types of ahad narration. Here, you have two narrators at each level. And this is the hadith, حدثنا يعقوب بن إبراهيم قال حدثنا ابن علية قال عن عبد العزيز بن الصهيب عن أنس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Hadith ha, when it comes in hadith, it means there's a tahwil, there is a further outbranching of the hadith. So the narrator has narrated this hadith, come to the narrator, which is Imam Bukhari. He is narrating this hadith, and then Hawa Haddasna mean, then he said, I also narrate the same hadith from my teacher Yaqub ibn Ibrahim, and then from Adam. That is another one. قال حدثنا شعبة عن قتادة عن أنس. So again, it gets like two branches. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. The hadith is actually like this. There's some error why they did it. Anyway, it shouldn't be here. Auto correction is something that I use. Anyway, maybe leave it like that. That would make it a little bit better. Yeah. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. None of you has perfected the faith. They haven't actually believed until I become more beloved to them from their parents, more beloved to them than their walid, their children, and all the humanity, all the creation. Again, this hadith could be sahih, but this is sahih, we know sahih Bukhari, but the Aziz hadith could be weak as well. And so, for example, this particular hadith has Anas who is narrating, Abu Huraira is narrating. Now, so from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, two Sahaba narrating, yeah. From each, we've just taken Anas in this case, Abdul Aziz ibn Shu'bah, Suhaib, and Qatada. These two are narrating from Anas ibn Malik. For Abdul Aziz ibn Suhaib, we have got Ismail ibn Ulayya and Abdul Warith. And from Qatada, we have got Shu'bah and Hussein ibn Mu'allim. So for each narrator throughout, there should be two with Hussein, two with Shu'bah, two with Ismail, two with Abdul Harith. And likewise, it goes on. So this is how it is. That at each level, it's been related by two different people. And then Hadith Gharib, which is also called Hadith Fard, they're lone narrator, only one. Only one. And this is Hadith Bukhari. In Sahih Bukhari, we just read in Sahih, in Al-Arba'in, that Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi, says, حدثنا Abdullah ibn Maslama, قال أخبرنا مالك عن يحيى بن سعيد عن محمد بن إبراهيم عن علقمة بن وقاص عن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما وعنهم أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الأعمال بالنية ولكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كان هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كان هجرته لدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة يتزوجها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. This is a hadith of إنما الأعمال بالنية, which is very famous and common. The hadith is actually a gharib hadith, which means there's only one narrator at each level. Okay. And again, you have to verify the hadith as Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, whatever it could be. And the farq, it could be mutlaq or nasabi. Mutlaq means when the narrator at the beginning is only one of them, or it could be anywhere there's one narrator. In the chain, only one narrator at some point. So called nasabi. But anyway, leave that there, inshallah. That's too much detail that you're not required to know. But since we mentioned it, keep it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We inshallah rejoin next week.